Years ago, I read a little book by a missiologist that stated that 1 out of every 3 adults should receive evangelism training at least once a year in your church. You know, the providing of continual training opportunities for your people is really important if you're going to see the spiritual conversations increase. So equipping your people on an ongoing basis is going to be really important. Why is that? Well, in many churches, the emphasis on nurturing existing Christians and strengthening their faith can be a preoccupation. While it's important, it's not the chief purpose. If training lacks the focus of reproduction, it will lead to an inward mentality that will puff up the church instead of building up the church and releasing the church into the great harvest field that Jesus has said that's right before us. Churches that continually have a goal of training a significant portion of their congregation in evangelism tend to be more outreach focused. So if you follow this rule that 1 out of every 3 adults should receive evangelism training at least once a year, that means if you're a church of 150, that means you have to have a goal of training 50 people in outreach. If you have a church of 1,000, that means over 300 need to be trained in evangelism. As your church grows bigger and bigger, achieving this ratio gets harder and needs more focus and intentionality from the leaders. So if you have a church of 10,000, that means you have to be training at least 3,000 people a year in how to do outreach and how to share their faith and get into meaningful spiritual conversations. So how do you do that? Here's three steps I think that can help you. Number 1, develop a training rhythm in your church that touches people weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually. How do you do it weekly? Well, by weekly is by creating a culture of investing, inviting, and including people outside the church into the life of your church. So training your people to prayerfully, spiritually invest in the people through loving them, through getting into meaningful spiritual conversations, relating with them, hanging out with them, doing life with them. By encouraging people to invite people, to take those invitational opportunities, to invite people to a small group, to invite them to an outreach event or a special meeting or to a worship gathering. And then try to include them into the life of the church. One of the greatest ways we've seen people outside the church come into the life of the church is through just doing community service projects. We had one church where they had thousands of people come and help them clean up the parks and do other community service projects that really benefited the community, but also got them to interact with believers in the local church. And then monthly, you do that by providing entry-level immersion experiences. In our next session, we're going to talk about how to create evangelistic immersion experiences for your people so that it will touch them in multiple levels and help them become more effective in sharing their faith with their friends and family. Quarterly, you need to have equipping days, quarterly equipping day. So if you're going to train a third of your church in evangelism, whether that's 30 people, 300 people, or 3,000 people, you're going to need to do that quarterly and figure that out and find a method, a training apparatus that works for your church and that you can continually work throughout your church. And then annually, I think one of the things you want to have is an evangelism emphasis and an annual way of just kind of deep diving into the life of the church through a Sunday morning series, through small group curriculum that really just helps the whole church get on board of what it means to be a part of Jesus' mission. So number 1, you got to start a training rhythm. Then the other thing is you need to start training trainers. I've discovered the faster that I can get the training out of the hands of professionals and into the hands of lay leaders, they own the process more deeply. So you got to ask yourself the question, which lay leaders can reinforce our investing, inviting, and including culture of our church? Which lay leaders can lead and promote entry-level experiences at a high level and get people engaged? Which lay leaders can become mentors of training people how to share their faith? So think about that. Think about how you can train trainers to do the teaching. Pastor, you don't need to do it all. Your staff doesn't need to do it all. We need to start equipping the laity in a stronger way to do this work. And then the third one is to focus on one tool that will mark your church. I actually learned this lesson from Pastor John Jenkins. He was teaching. Someone asked him, "How did you grow your church so fast in such a short amount of time?" And he answered it really interesting the way he answered. He said, "We trained everybody in our church how to do the Romans road." We trained everybody in our church how to lead someone to Christ and how to lead someone back to Christ. And the tool we used was the Romans road. So every janitor, every nursery worker, every secretary, every person throughout the church was trained in how to do the Romans road, how to lead someone to Christ or lead someone back to Christ through the Romans road method. When you think of Campus Crusade, what evangelism tool comes to your mind? Well, it's the 4 spiritual laws, right? When you think of navigators, you think of evangelism, I think of the bridge tool that they developed. When I think of the Billy Graham Association, I think of his evangelism tool, the steps to peace with God. What do people think when they come to your church? What do they think about evangelism? What do they think about an evangelism tool? Do they think anything about it? My encouragement to you is to find a tool that works for you and use it. A number of years ago, I developed a tool called the Spiritual Journey Guide. And that Spiritual Journey Guide shaped our church and now is actually shaping thousands of other churches. But it's just a spiritual conversation tool that helps people get into meaningful spiritual conversations and helps them actually have focused spiritual conversations that lead people to really interact with who Jesus is and the implications of Jesus in their life. So here's some action steps for you to take. Number 1, keep track of how many people you're training in evangelism every year. Start counting it. Make that part of your scorecard of your local church. Find trainers who can help you. Find those evangelists in your church. Because evangelists are not only people who can lead people to Christ, who have an energy or passion for evangelism, but they're also people who equip the church in evangelism. So find those trainers. And that would encourage you to find a tool. Find a tool that works in your culture and drive it deep into the heart of your church so that everybody knows, here's how we lead people to Christ. Here's the tool, here's the process in which we explain the gospel and help people experience the liberating joy of knowing Jesus as their personal Savior.
This has been a Converge Whiteboard Leadership Moment. To learn more about Converge or to join us, check out converge.org.